I never thought my greenhouse would become the battlefield that would tear apart an entire neighborhood. But that's exactly what happened when Patricia Hendricks decided to target me. It started on a Tuesday morning in Bend, Oregon, when I was checking on my tomato plants. The greenhouse had been my project for the past 8 months, a beautiful structure I'd built myself with transparent panels and a proper foundation. I'm Tyler Zimmerman, and I'd moved to this development called Cascade Meadows 3 years ago, drawn by the promise of mountain views and what I thought would be peaceful living. The property came with something special that most lots in the area didn't have: a natural well that had been drilled decades ago by the original landowner. That well would become more important than I ever imagined. The greenhouse sat about 30 feet from my back deck, measuring 20 by 30 feet. I'd researched everything, made sure it complied with local building codes, and even had it inspected by the county. Everything was legal and above board. I grew tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, and various herbs. It was my hobby, my stress relief after long days working as a software developer from my home office. Patricia had moved into the neighborhood about 6 months after me. She'd immediately joined the HOA board, and within a year, she'd become the president. The woman was in her late 40s, with short blonde hair styled in that specific way that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." She drove a white BMW SUV and wore expensive athleisure clothing, even though I'd never seen her exercise. Her husband, a quiet man named Robert, seemed to just nod along to whatever she said. The first time Patricia mentioned my greenhouse was at an HOA meeting I'd actually bothered to attend. She'd stood up during the open forum portion and said, "I'm concerned about the structure that Mr. Zimmerman has erected on his property. It's unsightly and may not be in compliance with our community standards." I'd raised my hand and calmly explained that the greenhouse was fully permitted and that I'd checked the HOA covenants before building. There was nothing in the rules about greenhouses, and my property was in full compliance with all setback requirements. Patricia had smiled tightly and said, "We'll see about that." 3 weeks after that meeting, I was in my greenhouse watering my pepper plants when I heard voices in my backyard. I stepped out to find Patricia standing there with a man in a county uniform. He had a clipboard and was taking photos of my greenhouse. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. The man turned to me. "I'm Doug Morrison with County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about an unpermitted structure on your property." I felt my jaw tighten. "The greenhouse is fully permitted. I have all the documentation inside." Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, a satisfied expression on her face. "The county needs to verify these things, Tyler. I'm sure you understand." I went inside and grabbed my folder with all the permits, inspection reports, and approval documents. Doug reviewed them carefully, taking his time with each page. After about 15 minutes, he handed them back to me. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Zimmerman. This structure is fully compliant with county regulations." He turned to Patricia. "Madam, this complaint is unfounded. The property owner has followed all proper procedures." Patricia's face flushed red. "But it's an eyesore. It doesn't match the aesthetic of our community." Doug shook his head. "That's not a code enforcement matter. That would be between you and your HOA. From the county's perspective, there are no violations here." He nodded to me and walked back toward the front of the house. Patricia glared at me. "This isn't over." "Apparently it is," I replied. "The county says everything is fine." She leaned in closer. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Building that monstrosity, ignoring the spirit of our community guidelines." "I'm not ignoring anything. I followed every rule, Patricia." Maybe you should focus on actual problems instead of inventing them." She pointed a finger at me. "You're going to regret this attitude, Tyler. Mark my words." I watched her storm off through my side gate, and I should have known then that this was just the beginning. Patricia wasn't the type to let things go. 2 days later, I received a letter from the HOA. It was a formal notice stating that my greenhouse violated Section 4.7 of the Community Covenants, which dealt with exterior modifications requiring aesthetic approval. I read through my copy of the covenants 3 times. Section 4.7 mentioned things like paint colors, roof materials, and permanent exterior additions to the main dwelling. There was nothing about auxiliary structures, nothing about greenhouses, and nothing that would apply to what I'd built. I decided to call my neighbor, Marcus Chen, who'd lived in Cascade Meadows since the development was first built 12 years ago. Marcus was a retired attorney and had actually helped write the original HOA documents. "Tyler, good to hear from you," Marcus said when he picked up. "What's going on?" I explained the situation, reading him the exact section Patricia was citing. Marcus chuckled. "That's a stretch, and she knows it. Section 4.7 has never been applied to anything except modifications to the primary residence. You built a separate structure, which isn't covered by that section. Hell, half the people in this neighborhood have sheds, gazebos, and other outbuildings. She's targeting you specifically. What should I do?" "Write a formal response. Cite the specific language of the covenant. Point out that your interpretation is consistent with how it's been applied historically, and request a hearing before the full board. Don't let her bully you with selective enforcement." I spent that evening crafting my response. I kept it professional but firm, pointing out everything Marcus had mentioned. I hand-delivered copies to each board member: Patricia, Vice President Sandra Miller, Treasurer Kevin Thompson, and Secretary Janet Reeves. Sandra called me the next day. "Tyler, I got your response. For what it's worth, I think Patricia is overstepping here. I've never seen Section 4.7 applied the way she's trying to use it. So you'll support me at the hearing." There was a pause. "I'll try." But Patricia can be very persuasive, and honestly, she makes life difficult for anyone who opposes her. Last year, Kevin voted against her on a landscaping issue, and she made his life hell for months. Filed noise complaints every time his teenage son played music, called code enforcement about his trash cans being out past collection time, the whole 9 yards. That's insane. "Welcome to HOA politics," Sandra said with a sigh. "Just be prepared for a fight." The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I got a second code enforcement visit, this time about my illegal water usage. Patricia had apparently called the county claiming I was illegally tapping into the municipal water supply for commercial agriculture. This inspector, a woman named Carol, was more thorough than Doug. She asked to see my well documentation. I showed her everything: the well drilling permit from 1987, the water rights certificate, and the recent water quality tests I'd had done when I moved in. "So this isn't connected to city water at all?" Carol asked. "Correct. It's a private well, fully legal, and I have full water rights. I use it for my house and the greenhouse." "And you're not selling any of what you grow?" "No, it's purely personal use. I give away extras to neighbors and friends, but there's no commercial operation here." Carol made some notes. "Mr. Zimmerman, you're clearly in compliance. I don't know who's filing these complaints, but they're wasting county resources." After she left, I was fuming. Patricia had now wasted the county's time twice with false complaints. I decided to document everything. I started a folder with copies of all the complaints, inspector reports, and correspondence. The HOA hearing was held on a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. About 20 homeowners showed up, which was unusual. Normally, these meetings drew maybe 5 people. Word had gotten around about the dispute. Patricia called the meeting to order and quickly moved through the standard business. Then she got to my greenhouse. "We have before us a matter of significant importance to our community," she began. "Mr. Zimmerman has constructed an unauthorized structure that violates our aesthetic guidelines. This greenhouse, while perhaps permitted by the county, does not comply with our community standards." I raised my hand. Point of order. The greenhouse was built in full compliance with all HOA covenants. There is no section in our governing documents that requires pre-approval for auxiliary structures. Patricia's eyes narrowed. Section 4.7 clearly states, Section 4.7 applies to modifications to primary residences. I interrupted. This has been the interpretation since this community was founded. I've spoken with residents who were here at the beginning, and this section has never been applied to separate structures like sheds, gazebos, or in this case, a greenhouse. Kevin, the treasurer, spoke up. "Tyler has a point, Patricia. My shed wasn't subject to review under 4.7. Neither was Janet's gazebo." Janet nodded. "That's true. We've always interpreted that section as applying only to the main house." Patricia's face was turning red. "Those structures are different. They're small, unobtrusive. This greenhouse is massive and can be seen from the street." "Actually, it can't," said Marcus, who'd come to support me. "I've walked the entire street. The greenhouse is completely hidden from public view by Tyler's fence and landscaping. I have photos if anyone wants to see them." Sandra looked at the photos Marcus passed around. "He's right. You can't see it from the street at all." "That's not the point," Patricia practically shouted. "The point is that Tyler thinks he can do whatever he wants without consulting this board. He's showing complete disregard for our community standards." An older woman in the back raised her hand. Her name was Dorothy, and she'd lived in Cascade Meadows for 10 years. "Patricia, I hate to say this, but it seems like you have a personal vendetta here. The young man followed the rules. He got his permits. He built something nice on his own property that nobody can even see. What exactly is the problem?" Several people murmured in agreement. Patricia stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "The problem is that people like Tyler think they're above the community. They think that just because something is technically legal, they should do it without consideration for their neighbors." "I talked to my immediate neighbors before I built it," I said. "The Johnsons on my left and the Parkers on my right both said they had no issues with it. I have that in writing." This was clearly not going the way Patricia wanted. She called for a vote on whether my greenhouse violated Section 4.7. Sandra, Kevin, and Janet all voted no. Patricia was the only yes vote. "Fine," Patricia said coldly. "But this board will be watching your property very carefully, Mr. Zimmerman. Very carefully indeed." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Over the next month, I received 5 more code enforcement visits. Someone complained about my lawn height, even though I mowed every week. Someone complained about strange odors coming from my property, which code enforcement determined was just me grilling burgers. Someone complained that my exterior house paint was the wrong shade, even though I hadn't painted anything, and the house was the same color it had been for years. Every single complaint was unfounded. Every single inspector told me the complaints were bogus, and every single time, I knew it was Patricia. The final straw came on a Saturday morning in late June. I was in my greenhouse, checking on my tomato plants, when I heard someone clearing their throat behind me. I turned to find not just one code enforcement officer, but 3 of them, along with a sheriff's deputy. "Tyler Zimmerman?" one of the officers asked. "Yes, that's me. What's going on? We received a report of illegal construction and potential safety violations. We need to conduct a full inspection of this structure. I felt my blood pressure spike. I've been inspected multiple times. Everything is permitted and legal. The deputy stepped forward. Sir, we just need to do our job. This will go faster if you cooperate. They spent 2 hours going through my greenhouse with a fine-tooth comb. They checked the foundation, the electrical connections, the ventilation system, everything. They took measurements, photos, and notes. The whole time I stood there watching, my hands clenched into fists. Finally, the lead inspector, a man named Robert Jackson, approached me. Mr. Zimmerman, I need to be honest with you. This is the most properly built and documented structure I've inspected in months. Everything is not just up to code but exceeds code in several areas. Whoever has been calling in these complaints is wasting everyone's time, including yours. It's my HOA president, I said. Patricia Hendricks. She's called code enforcement on me at least 8 times now. Robert's expression hardened. That's harassment. You should know that filing false code complaints can result in fines and penalties. After they left, I sat in my greenhouse, staring at my plants. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on offense. That evening, I started researching. I pulled up property records, water rights documents, and the original development plans for Cascade Meadows. What I found was interesting. Very interesting. When the development was originally planned and built, the builder had included a provision for community irrigation. The area where we lived didn't have the most reliable water supply, and the developer wanted to ensure the common areas could be maintained. The solution was to connect the community irrigation system to the well on my property. I owned the well outright. It was on my land, and I had full water rights to it. But there was an easement that allowed the HOA to use the well water for irrigating common areas, including the community park, the landscaping around the clubhouse, and the retention ponds that kept everything looking nice. I dug deeper into the easement language. It was a permissive easement, not a mandatory one. The key phrase was the property owner grants permission for community use of well water for irrigation purposes. Permission. That meant I could revoke it. I called Marcus the next morning. I need your legal opinion on something. I explained what I'd found. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Tyler, you're technically correct. That's a permissive easement and you could revoke it. But are you sure you want to go nuclear? That would affect the entire community, not just Patricia. Marcus, she's made my life hell for months. She's weaponized code enforcement against me, filed at least 8 false complaints, and wasted countless hours of county resources and my time. I'm done being her punching bag. I understand, but think carefully about this. Once you revoke that easement, there's no going back. The HOA would have to find another water source, which would be expensive and difficult. Good. Maybe they'll think twice about who they elect as president. I spent the next week preparing my case. I consulted with a real estate attorney named David Martinez, who confirmed that I had the absolute right to revoke the permissive easement. He helped me draft a formal revocation notice that was legally airtight. The notice gave the HOA 30 days to stop using my well water. I hand-delivered it to Patricia on a Tuesday afternoon. She answered her door in yoga pants and a designer tank top, a glass of white wine in her hand. "What do you want, Tyler?" she asked, not bothering to hide her contempt. "This is for you." I handed her the envelope. "It's a formal notice that I'm revoking the HOA's permission to use my well water." She laughed. "You can't do that. The community has always used that well." Read the document. I have every legal right to revoke a permissive easement. You have 30 days to make other arrangements. Patricia's smile faded as she scanned the first page. This is ridiculous. You're punishing the entire community because of a personal grudge. No, Patricia. I'm exercising my property rights. You've spent months harassing me, filing false code enforcement complaints, and wasting county resources. You've made it clear that you have no respect for me or my property rights, so I'm done providing you with free water. The board will fight this. They can try. My attorney says this is ironclad. You have 30 days. I turned and walked away, feeling lighter than I had in months. The next HOA meeting was explosive. The clubhouse was packed with at least 60 homeowners, all of whom had heard about the water situation. Patricia tried to maintain control, but people were angry. "How could you let this happen?" demanded Robert Gonzalez, who lived 3 streets over. "The community park is already turning brown. Do you know how much it's going to cost to connect to municipal water?" Patricia pointed at me. "This is Tyler's fault. He's the one who revoked the easement out of spite." I stood up. "I revoked it because Patricia has spent the last 4 months harassing me. She's filed at least 8 false code enforcement complaints against me. She's weaponized her position as HOA president to target me personally. I have documentation of every complaint and every inspector's report showing they were all unfounded." Sandra spoke up. "Is this true, Patricia?" "I was protecting the community's interests," Patricia said defensively. "By lying to code enforcement," Marcus said. "Tyler, do you have those documents with you?" I pulled out my folder and passed around copies of the complaint reports and inspector findings. The room buzzed as people read through them. Kevin, the treasurer, looked up from the documents. "Patricia, this is serious. You've been filing false complaints. That's not protecting the community, that's harassment." "I was trying to enforce our standards," Patricia insisted. "What standards?" Janet asked. "The greenhouse doesn't violate any of our covenants. The board voted on this." "You were the only one who thought it was a violation." Dorothy, the older woman who'd spoken at the previous meeting, stood up. "I move that we hold a special election to recall Patricia as president and remove her from the board." "Second," called out at least 5 different people. Patricia's face went pale. "You can't do this." "Actually, we can," Marcus said. "The bylaws allow for recall elections with a petition signed by 20% of homeowners. I'd say we have far more than that in this room right now." The vote wasn't even close. 47 homeowners signed the recall petition that night. Patricia was given 15 days to respond before a formal recall election would be held, but Patricia wasn't done fighting. 3 days after the meeting, I received a lawsuit. Patricia, acting as HOA president, was suing me for breach of easement and demanding I restore water access to the HOA. I immediately forwarded the lawsuit to David Martinez. He called me that same afternoon. "This is a nuisance suit," David said. "She has no legal standing. The easement language is clear, and you followed proper procedure to revoke it. We'll file a motion to dismiss, and I'd also recommend we file a countersuit for harassment and abuse of process." "Do it," I said. "I'm tired of being pushed around." The countersuit laid out everything. The 8 false code enforcement complaints, the selective enforcement of HOA rules, the harassment, and the emotional distress it had caused. We were asking for actual damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. Patricia's attorney, a young guy named Brad Morrison, clearly realized his client had a weak case. He reached out to David to discuss settlement within a week of being served with the countersuit. "His client wants to negotiate," David told me. "She's willing to drop her lawsuit if you drop yours and restore the water easement." "Absolutely not," I said. "She doesn't get to weaponize the legal system against me and then just walk away. I want this to go forward." The recall election happened on schedule. Patricia lost in a landslide. Only 8 people voted to keep her on the board. Sandra was elected as the new president, with Kevin remaining as treasurer and Janet as secretary. They appointed Marcus to fill the vacant board position. One of Sandra's first acts as president was to publicly apologize to me at an HOA meeting. "Tyler, on behalf of the board and the community, I want to apologize for how you were treated. What happened to you was wrong, and it doesn't represent the values of this community." The lawsuit moved forward. Patricia tried to get it dismissed, but the judge denied her motion. Discovery was particularly brutal for her. We subpoenaed all the code enforcement complaints, and the county provided detailed records showing that Patricia had personally filed 11 complaints against me, all of which were found to be without merit. We also deposed code enforcement officers. Robert Jackson, the inspector who'd done the thorough greenhouse inspection, testified that he'd never seen such a clear case of weaponizing the code enforcement system for personal vendettas. "In my 15 years doing this job," Robert testified, "I've never encountered anyone who filed 11 complaints about a single property in 4 months, especially when every single complaint was unfounded. It's a waste of taxpayer resources and borders on criminal misuse of government services." Patricia's attorney tried to argue that she'd been acting in good faith, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge wasn't buying it. Meanwhile, the HOA was dealing with the reality of losing access to my well water. They got quotes for connecting to municipal water, and the cheapest option was $90,000. That would require a special assessment of about $1,200 per household. Sandra approached me privately one evening. She knocked on my door looking exhausted. "Tyler, can we talk?" she asked. I invited her in and offered her coffee. We sat in my living room. "I know you have every right to keep the water access revoked," Sandra began, "but I'm asking you, neighbor to neighbor, if there's any way we can work something out. The cost of municipal water is going to hurt a lot of families in this community. The Johnsons on your street are on a fixed income. The special assessment might force them to sell." I'd been thinking about this. "I'm not doing it for free anymore," I said. "But I'm willing to restore access under a new agreement, a formal contract that specifies the exact terms with payment to me for water usage. That's fair. What are you thinking? $200 a month with a formal contract that can't be revoked except for non-payment." The contract also includes a clause that prohibits the HOA from taking any action against my greenhouse or filing any complaints about my property unless there's a genuine safety issue verified by a third-party inspector. Sandra nodded slowly. "That's actually very reasonable." The special assessment would have cost everyone $1,200 up front plus higher monthly water bills. $200 a month split among all the homeowners would be maybe $3 per household. "And one more thing," I added. "Patricia Hendricks is permanently banned from any HOA leadership position. If she ever runs for the board again and wins, the water contract is void." "Done," Sandra said without hesitation. The contract was drawn up by David Martinez and reviewed by the HOA's attorney. It was approved by the board and ratified by a vote of the homeowners. My well water was restored to the HOA after being shut off for 45 days. The community park looked rough, but it would recover. The lawsuit against Patricia concluded 3 months later. The judge found in my favor on all counts. Patricia was ordered to pay me $25,000 in actual damages, $50,000 in punitive damages, and my attorney's fees, which came to another $18,000. The judge's written opinion was scathing. The defendant's abuse of her position and the code enforcement system was egregious and cannot be tolerated, Judge Carol Williams wrote. HOA leadership is a position of trust, and the defendant violated that trust in the most fundamental way. Her actions were not those of someone protecting community interests, but of someone pursuing a personal vendetta at the expense of both the plaintiff and taxpayer resources. But the legal consequences weren't over. The county prosecutor, after reviewing the code enforcement records and the judge's findings, decided to file criminal charges against Patricia for filing false police reports and misuse of government services. I got a call from the prosecutor's office asking if I'd be willing to testify. I didn't hesitate. The criminal trial was relatively quick. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that she genuinely believed there were violations, but the prosecution had code enforcement officers testify that Patricia had been informed multiple times that her complaints were unfounded, yet she kept filing them anyway. The jury found her guilty on 6 counts of filing false reports. The judge sentenced her to 300 hours of community service, 2 years of probation, and ordered her to pay restitution to the county for the wasted code enforcement resources. Patricia and Robert put their house up for sale within a week of the sentencing. I saw the moving trucks come 6 weeks later. I was in my greenhouse, tending to my tomatoes, when I saw Patricia one last time. She was supervising the movers from her driveway. Our eyes met across the yard. She looked older, diminished. All the fire and fury that had defined her was gone, replaced by something that looked like resignation or maybe shame. She turned away without acknowledging me. Marcus came by that evening with a bottle of bourbon. We sat on my back deck, looking out at the greenhouse. "You know, half the neighborhood thinks you're a hero," Marcus said, pouring us each a drink. "The other half thinks you went too far." "What do you think?" I asked. Marcus considered this. "I think you did what you had to do." Patricia made it personal. She weaponized systems that are supposed to serve everyone. She abused her power. Someone had to stand up to her. It got pretty ugly. Yeah, it did. But sometimes that's what it takes. The question is, was it worth it? I looked at my greenhouse, the plants thriving inside, the structure I'd built with my own hands standing solid and legal. "Yeah," I said, "it was worth it." The new HOA board turned out to be everything the old one wasn't. Sandra ran meetings efficiently and fairly. She focused on actual community issues, repaving roads, updating the playground equipment, organizing neighborhood events. The monthly water payment came through like clockwork, and my relationship with the HOA was purely professional and cordial. The Johnsons, my neighbors to the left, started coming by to get vegetables from my greenhouse. Martha Johnson was in her 70s and loved cooking, and she'd trade her homemade pies for my fresh tomatoes and peppers. George Johnson helped me install a new irrigation system in the greenhouse as a thank you. "You know, we were ready to move," George told me one afternoon while we were running irrigation lines. "That special assessment would have broken us financially. What you did, working out that water contract, you saved us." "I just wanted to be treated fairly," I said. "Sometimes fair means standing up for yourself," George replied. Patricia needed someone to stand up to her. She'd been bullying people in this neighborhood for years. You just happened to be the one who had the leverage to actually stop her. About 6 months after Patricia moved away, I expanded my greenhouse. I added another 10 feet to the length and installed some hydroponic systems. I went through the proper permitting process, though this time I also gave the HOA a courtesy notification, even though I didn't legally have to. Sandra sent me a nice email back. "Thanks for the heads up, Tyler. The structure looks great, and I'm sure your plants will love the extra space. Let me know if you need anything from the HOA." That was what community leadership should look like. professional, supportive, focused on actual issues instead of personal vendettas. The criminal case and civil lawsuit had been covered by the local Bend newspaper. I'd gotten a few interview requests, but I'd turned them all down. I didn't want to be the face of HOA resistance or whatever narrative they were trying to build. I just wanted to live my life, grow my vegetables, and be left alone. But the story had spread through local HOA circles. I started getting emails and phone calls from people in other developments dealing with similar issues. Overzealous board members, selective enforcement, harassment campaigns. I'd give them the same advice. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. One guy, a homeowner in a development near Redmond, was dealing with an HOA that was trying to ban his bird feeders. I walked him through the process of checking his covenants, researching the enforcement history, and building a paper trail. 6 months later, he sent me an email saying the HOA had backed down after he'd presented them with documentation showing they'd never enforced that rule against anyone else. "You inspired me to fight back," he wrote. "Thank you. I never set out to be some kind of anti-HOA crusader. I just wanted to grow tomatoes in peace. But sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you don't anticipate. The greenhouse became my sanctuary. After long days of video calls and coding, I'd go out there and just work with my hands. There's something meditative about pruning tomato plants, checking soil moisture, and watching things grow. The greenhouse represented more than just a building to me now. It represented the principle that you don't let bullies win, that property rights matter, and that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours. A year after the whole mess started, I was harvesting tomatoes when Sandra stopped by. She'd become a friend over the months, someone I could talk to about neighborhood issues and life in general. "The community garden project is moving forward," she told me. "We're going to put it in that empty lot near the clubhouse. Several residents have already volunteered to help maintain it." "That's great," I said, handing her some fresh tomatoes. "Community gardens are a perfect use for common space." "We were hoping you might be willing to give a workshop on greenhouse growing," Sandra said. "Share some of your expertise. I know a lot of people are intimidated by starting their own." I thought about it. A year ago, the HOA had been trying to tear down my greenhouse. Now they wanted me to teach people how to build their own. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Sure," I said. "I'd be happy to help." The workshop was held on a Saturday afternoon in September. 23 people showed up, including Martha and George Johnson, Marcus Chen, and several families I'd only known in passing. I talked about site selection, foundation preparation, proper ventilation, and irrigation systems. People asked questions, took notes, and seemed genuinely interested. After the workshop, a younger couple approached me. The husband, whose name was Chris, said, "We just moved in last month. We heard about what happened with the old HOA president. Just wanted to say thanks for standing up to her. We almost didn't buy in this development because of some of the reviews online about HOA problems, but the recent changes made us feel better about it." That's when it really hit me. What I'd done hadn't just been about me and my greenhouse. It had been about establishing that property owners had rights, that HOA boards needed to operate fairly and within their actual authority, and that abuse of power had consequences. The water contract continued without any issues. The HOA paid on time every month, and the community common areas stayed green and well maintained. My well was deep and strong, and providing water for irrigation barely made a dent in its capacity. I also noticed that HOA meetings became more focused and productive. Board members stuck to actual business instead of pursuing personal agendas. Homeowners felt more comfortable speaking up because they knew the board would listen. It was like Patricia's removal had lanced a boil, and the whole community was healthier for it. One evening in October, I was closing up the greenhouse when I noticed someone standing at the back corner of my property. It was getting dark, and for a moment I felt a spike of concern. Then I recognized the silhouette. It was Robert Hendricks, Patricia's husband. "Robert," I called out. "Is everything okay?" He walked closer, and I could see his face in the fading light. He looked tired but somehow more relaxed than I remembered. "Tyler, I hope you don't mind me stopping by," he said. "I wanted to talk to you before we left town permanently." "You're leaving?" "Yeah. Patricia and I are getting divorced. I'm moving to Seattle for a job opportunity. She's going to stay with her sister in California." "I'm sorry to hear that." Robert shook his head. "Don't be. It's been a long time coming. The whole situation with you and the HOA, the lawsuit, the criminal charges, it was a wake-up call. Patricia had been spiraling for years, and I just enabled it. I never stood up to her, never told her when she was going too far." He paused, looking at the greenhouse. "I wanted to apologize for not stopping her, for not speaking up when she started targeting you. I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I took the coward's way out and stayed silent. I didn't know what to say. Robert had always seemed like a decent guy, just completely overshadowed by his wife's aggressive personality." "I appreciate you saying that," I finally replied. "What you did took courage," Robert continued. "Standing up to her, fighting back, not backing down even when she escalated. I should have had that courage years ago. Maybe things would have turned out differently. You can't change the past. You can only move forward." Robert nodded. "That's what I'm trying to do. New city, new job, new life. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in the Hendricks household was your enemy." We shook hands, and Robert walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The whole situation had casualties beyond just Patricia. Her husband, her reputation, her finances, all of it had come crashing down because she couldn't let go of a personal grudge about a greenhouse. Winter came to Bend, and my greenhouse proved its worth. While everyone else's gardens died back with the frost, I was still harvesting lettuce, spinach, and cold-weather vegetables. I shared abundantly with neighbors, and my fresh greens became a hit at the community potlucks that Sandra organized. The HOA actually asked if I'd consider expanding the water contract to include a community greenhouse. They wanted to build near the garden plots. I agreed, for an additional $75 a month. The community greenhouse went up in early spring, and several families started growing vegetables there under my mentorship. It was oddly satisfying to see the thing that Patricia had tried to destroy become the foundation for community building. The greenhouse that was supposed to be torn down had instead spawned multiple growing projects throughout Cascade Meadows. I ran into Doug Morrison, the first code enforcement officer who'd come to inspect my greenhouse, at a local coffee shop one morning. He recognized me immediately. "Tyler Zimmerman, right? The greenhouse guy." "That's me," I said. "I heard about what happened with that HOA president. About time someone faced consequences for abusing the complaint system. You know how much time we wasted on those bogus calls. We could have been dealing with actual code violations instead of chasing shadows." "I documented everything," I told him. "That's what made the difference." Doug nodded. "Smart. Most people don't think to keep records. They just get frustrated and give up. You fought back with facts and evidence. That's the right way to do it." As spring turned to summer, my greenhouse was bursting with life. Tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, herbs, all growing in abundance. I'd become known in the neighborhood as the guy with the vegetables, and I was fine with that identity. It was better than being known as the guy who fought the HOA, even though technically I was both. The second annual community garden workshop happened in June. This time, 40 people showed up. The community greenhouse was producing well, and several homeowners had built their own smaller greenhouse structures on their properties. Each one properly permitted, each one in compliance with both county codes and HOA covenants. Marcus came by one evening with a proposal. Some of us are thinking about running for county commissioner positions. We want to push for reforms to the HOA complaint process, maybe require some kind of penalty for repeated false code enforcement complaints. That's ambitious, I said. Your case highlighted a real problem. HOA board members can weaponize government resources with no consequences unless someone has the time and money to sue them. There should be systematic protections against that. I'd support that, I said. What do you need from me? Would you be willing to testify before the county commission? Share your story as a case study for why reform is needed. I agreed. 2 months later, I spent an hour before the Deschutes County Commission detailing what had happened. The 11 false complaints, the wasted inspector time, the harassment campaign. Other homeowners from across the county shared similar stories. The commission voted unanimously to implement a new policy. After 3 unfounded complaints from the same source about the same property within a calendar year, that person would be barred from filing additional complaints for 6 months and would be subject to fines. Repeat offenders could face criminal charges immediately rather than only after a lengthy pattern of abuse. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something. Code enforcement officers testified that they were grateful for the protection against abuse of the system. I never expected my fight over a greenhouse to lead to county-level policy changes, but that's how these things work sometimes. One person stands up, others take notice, and gradually the system improves. 2 years after the initial conflict, I was expanding my greenhouse again. This time, I was adding a propagation area for starting seedlings that I could donate to the community garden and the local food bank. I'd gotten all my permits in order, sent courtesy notifications to the HOA board, and everything was moving smoothly. Sandra stopped by during the construction to see how it was going. "You know, Tyler, I've been thinking about your story a lot," she said. "About how close we came to losing you as a neighbor. If Patricia had succeeded in forcing you to tear down the greenhouse, you probably would have moved. And look at what we would have lost. The water contract that saves everyone money, your expertise and mentorship, the fresh vegetables you share, all of it." "I wasn't going to let her force me out," I said. "I know. But a lot of people would have just given up and left. It's easier than fighting. The fact that you stood your ground changed this whole community for the better." I thought about that. She was right, in a way. It would have been easier to just sell the house and move somewhere without an HOA. But that would have been letting Patricia win. And it would have sent a message that bullying works, that abuse of power doesn't have consequences. The expansion was completed in August. The propagation area worked beautifully, and I was able to start hundreds of seedlings for fall planting. I donated flats of lettuce, spinach, and kale starts to the community garden, and gave more to the local food bank's garden program. The local newspaper did a story about the community garden program and featured my greenhouse. The reporter asked about the conflict with the previous HOA president. "That was a difficult time," I said carefully. "But it led to positive changes, better HOA leadership, stronger policies protecting homeowners, and a more engaged community. Sometimes conflict, when handled properly, can lead to better outcomes." The article ran with photos of my greenhouse and the community garden. I got emails from people as far away as Portland and Sacramento, asking for advice on dealing with their own HOA problems. I always gave the same advice. Know your rights, document everything, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, and remember that HOA board members are neighbors who volunteered, not dictators. They have specific, limited powers, and they can be held accountable when they abuse those powers. 3 years after the whole mess started, I was harvesting tomatoes when a car pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s got out, looking nervous. "Are you Tyler Zimmerman?" she asked. "I am. Can I help you? My name is Jennifer. I just moved into the old Hendricks house. I wanted to introduce myself and ask you about something." We sat on my deck, and Jennifer explained that she'd been nervous about buying the house because of the history. The real estate agent had been required to disclose the previous owner's legal troubles and departure from the community. "But everyone I talked to in the neighborhood said wonderful things about the community now," Jennifer said. "They said things changed after you stood up to the old HOA president. I wanted to thank you for that, actually. If the neighborhood was still run the way it was back then, I never would have bought here." "How are you settling in?" I asked. "Great, actually. Sandra from the HOA brought over a welcome basket and invited me to the next community potluck. The Johnsons on one side and the Parkers on the other both introduced themselves. It feels like a real community. That's what it had all been for, really. Not revenge against Patricia, not fighting for the sake of fighting, but creating a community where people could live peacefully, where rules were applied fairly, and where leadership served the community rather than personal agendas. Jennifer became a regular at the community garden and eventually started her own small greenhouse. The Johnsons helped her get started, passing along the knowledge I'd shared with them. The water contract renewal came up in its 3rd year. The HOA board asked if I'd be willing to extend it for another 5 years at the same rate. I agreed, and we signed a long-term contract that gave both sides stability and predictability. Marcus, who'd been re-elected to the board every year, said, "You know, this water contract is the best deal the HOA has ever made. We get reliable irrigation for the common areas at a fraction of what municipal water would cost, and you get compensated fairly for a resource you own. It's what HOA relationships should look like, mutually beneficial and respectful." I continued to expand and improve my greenhouse over the years. I added solar panels to run the fans and irrigation pumps. I installed a rainwater collection system to supplement the well water. I experimented with different growing techniques and varieties. The greenhouse became my legacy in a way I never expected. Not just the physical structure, but what it represented. The importance of standing up for your rights, the value of community built on mutual respect, and the consequences of abusing power. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had remarried and was living in San Diego. Apparently, she'd stayed far away from any HOA involvement. Robert, her ex-husband, had thrived in Seattle and was engaged to someone new. Both of them had moved on with their lives, shaped by what had happened but not defined by it. As for me, I was exactly where I wanted to be. In my greenhouse, surrounded by plants, in a community that had learned hard lessons about fairness and accountability. The structure that Patricia had tried so hard to destroy stood as a reminder that sometimes the right thing to do is fight back, stand your ground, and refuse to be bullied. My well continued to provide water for both my property and the community common areas. The greenhouse continued to produce abundant vegetables that I shared freely with neighbors. And the community continued to thrive under leadership that understood their role was to serve, not to rule. Every time I walked into my greenhouse, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd defeated Patricia, though I had, but because I'd proven something important, that ordinary people have power when they know their rights and aren't afraid to defend them. That documentation and persistence can overcome abuse and harassment. And that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but simply living well and building something positive from conflict. The tomatoes grew heavy on their vines, the peppers ripened in shades of red and yellow and green, and the herbs filled the air with their fragrance. My greenhouse stood solid and legal, a testament to the simple truth that doing things the right way, standing up for yourself, and refusing to back down in the face of bullying will ultimately prevail. Patricia had tried to use her power to destroy what I'd built, but in the end, all she destroyed was herself. And my greenhouse remained, stronger and more productive than ever.